So this guy David is a claims specialist at the Social Security office in Houston. That means he has access to the personal information of recently deceased people, names, social security numbers, dates of birth, dates of death, and David looks at all that data and thinks, I can make money off dead people. So he starts recruiting women with kids to pose as widows of men they've never met. $3.3 million later, David is headed to federal prison for 7 years. David Lam was 46 years old, living in Pearland, Texas, just south of Houston. He worked for the Social Security Administration as an operations supervisor and claims specialist. That meant every single day, David sat in front of a government computer and processed benefit applications, deaths, retirements, disability claims. He had authorized clearance to access personally identifying information as part of his actual job duties. Social security numbers, birth dates, home addresses, death records, all of it. Right there on his screen. And for a while, David did his job, processed claims, helped people file paperwork, normal government employee stuff. But at some point, David looked at all that sensitive data flowing through his screen and had an idea, a really bad idea. See, when someone dies, their surviving spouse and minor children can file for survivor benefits through Social Security. It's a completely legitimate program. If your husband passes away and you've got 2 kids under 18, you can apply for monthly payments to help cover the gap. It's meant to keep families from going broke after losing a provider. Happens every day across the country. David figured out that nobody was cross-referencing the widows with the dead men. Not closely enough anyway. The system trusted that the person filing the claim actually had a real connection to the deceased, and David realized he could exploit that trust from the inside. So he started pulling the personal information of recently deceased men from the SSA database. Men who had just died. Men whose records were fresh in the system. Men whose families probably had no idea their dead relative's identity was about to be used in a fraud scheme. And then David went shopping for fake widows. He recruited co-conspirators. Women with children. Women who had zero connection to any of these dead men. The deceased men did not father their children. The women had never met them, never lived with them, never shared an address with them. They probably never heard these men's names before David brought them into the scheme. But on paper, David made it look like these women were grieving widows filing legitimate survivor benefit claims for themselves and their kids. And the way David ran this was pretty hands-on. He would pull the dead man's personal information from the SSA system. Then he'd hand that information to one of his recruited women and coach her on what to say, what forms to file, what details to include to make the application look real. He'd tell them the dead man's full name, his social security number, his date of birth, his date of death. Everything they needed to walk into that office and pretend they'd lost a husband. And because David was the one processing claims on the inside, he could push the applications through without raising immediate flags. He knew the system. He knew which boxes to check. He knew what a legitimate application looked like because he'd processed thousands of them. So when a fraudulent one came through his queue, he made sure it looked just right. At least that's what he thought. The money started flowing. Social security checks going out to women who had no legal right to a single dollar of it. Monthly survivor benefit payments landing in their bank accounts, month after month, adding up fast. And David made sure he got his cut. The arrangement was simple. The women would receive the benefit payments, keep a portion for themselves, then kick back the rest to David through digital payment apps, Zelle transfers, Cash App deposits, Chime transactions, quick, quiet, no paper trail. Or so David assumed. He probably thought digital payments were safer than meeting in a parking lot with an envelope full of cash. He was wrong about that. Now I want you to think about this for a second. David wasn't some outsider hacking into a government database from a basement in another country. He was the system. He had a badge, a government ID, a desk, and authorized access to every piece of information he needed to pull this off. He didn't break in through some firewall. He just walked through the front door every morning, sat down at his computer, and helped himself to dead people's identities, which, if you ask me, makes the whole thing 10 times worse. The government literally paid him a salary to protect the data he was stealing. And David didn't do this once or twice and call it quits. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This went on across dozens of fraudulent applications. Dozens of dead men's identities stolen from government records. Dozens of fake widows coached and sent in to collect checks they had no right to. The total damage to Social Security climbed past $3.3 million before anyone caught on. But government fraud on this scale leaves footprints. The SSA Office of Inspector General started noticing irregularities in the Houston office. Unusual clusters of survivor benefit claims. Applications that didn't quite add up when you looked at them closely. Too many brand new widows filing through the same regional office, processed by the same employee. Investigators started asking questions. Why were so many survivor claims coming from one desk? Why did the applicants have no traceable history with the deceased? A pattern started forming, and it pointed straight at David. And once investigators started pulling David's case files, the whole thing fell apart fast. The women he recruited had no verifiable connection to the deceased men. No marriage certificates that held up to scrutiny. No shared addresses in any database. No joint tax filings. No shared history of any kind. Just applications that magically appeared in David's queue and magically got approved over and over again. The investigation went deeper. Agents traced the money trail. Zelle receipts showed payments flowing from the recruited women's accounts directly to David. Cash App records matched the same timeline. Chime transaction logs confirmed the same pattern. Digital breadcrumbs leading from every fake widow straight back to David Lam in Pearland. Every split payment was a receipt. Every transfer was a piece of evidence with a timestamp and an account number attached to it. David thought he was being clever using apps instead of cash. Turns out, digital payments are a federal prosecutor's dream. Nothing disappears. Everything gets logged. Every transaction sits in a server somewhere, waiting for a subpoena. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. More stories like this every week. So the feds built their case. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Texas charged David with 2 counts: conspiracy to defraud the United States and aggravated identity theft. Those are not small charges. Conspiracy to defraud carries up to 5 years on its own. Aggravated identity theft adds a mandatory 2-year consecutive sentence on top of whatever else the judge hands down, and David, looking at the mountain of evidence stacked against him, did the math. On June 5, 2025, David pleaded guilty to both counts. No trial, no jury, no defense, just a guilty plea and a long wait for sentencing. Now, David wasn't the only one going down. His co-conspirators started falling too. At least one of the women he recruited, a Houston woman, also pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges connected to the same scheme. She admitted to posing as the surviving spouse of a deceased person she had never met, filing false paperwork, and collecting benefits she knew she wasn't entitled to. The whole network David built started collapsing, one plea deal at a time. Each person flipping, each person confirming the same story. David recruited them, David gave them the dead men's information, and David told them what to do. Sentencing came in February 2026. Federal Judge Sim Lake looked at the scope of what David had done and handed down 84 months in federal prison. That's 7 years. And this is federal time, not state time. There's no parole in the federal system. David serves that sentence day for day. On top of the prison term, the court ordered David to pay restitution of $3,346,280. Every dollar he stole using dead people's identities, the court wants it back. And I want to point something out. David didn't steal from some nameless corporation. He stole from the Social Security Administration. That's the fund that pays retirement benefits to your grandparents. That's disability payments for people who can't work. That's survivor benefits for actual widows and actual orphans who actually lost someone they loved. Every fraudulent dollar David pulled out of that system was a dollar taken from people who genuinely needed it. So when you hear people talk about Social Security running low on funds, maybe consider that guys like David were raiding the vault from the inside while collecting a government paycheck. David's remaining co-conspirators are still working their way through the federal court system as of early 2026. Some have pleaded guilty. Others are presumably negotiating deals of their own. The SSA Inspector General's office issued a statement after the sentencing, noting that this kind of insider fraud fundamentally undermines public trust in the benefits system that millions of Americans depend on. Which, I guess, is a bureaucratic way of saying David made everyone's Social Security a little less safe. And nobody knows yet how many other employees at other offices might be running similar schemes that haven't been caught. 7 years in federal prison, $3.3 million in restitution he'll probably never fully repay. A government career destroyed, a pension gone. And all because David Lam sat at his desk one day, looked at the personal information of dead Americans, and decided their identities were his to sell. If you want more stories like this, they're on the channel.